When I was a kid and it was time to pick a rainy day movie to pop into our VHS player, my brother and I would often choose Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back. When he was feeling particularly benevolent, we got to watch Return of the Jedi. But it's in Empire where we really come to understand the predicament of Luke Skywalker, a young man with dreams of fighting in the rebellion against the evil empire that has taken over the galaxy. Now, there won't be any spoilers here, and I beg you not to tell my daughter until she could watch it for herself. But at some point, we learn that somebody is somebody's father. And from there, Luke's story unfolds. With this news, Luke, who is training to be a Jedi Knight to defeat what is known as the dark side, is now constantly beaten over the head with a single message, that no matter what he does or how hard he tries, embracing the dark side is his destiny. Vader tells him, the Emperor tells him, even wise old Yoda warns him of it. Luke may be classically wrestling between good and evil, but his greatest struggle is against the idea that his story is already written. That no matter how hard he fights against it, the path that he is on has a foregone conclusion, which is both tragic and inevitable. Because if that is true, then he has already lost. Now, we are not, most of us, Jedi Knights. But we also face forces and pressures similar to those that George Lucas wrote into Luke's story. We regularly receive messages that our future, our destiny, is already written, both tragic and inevitable. I came across a recent article whose title is "Collapse of Civilization is the Most Likely Outcome." That's just the title. And it wasn't even a hook to get me to read on for the surprise and hopeful ending. Collapse of Civilization is the most likely outcome was both the title and the conclusion. And it's not an outlier. Similarly ominous articles appear all over now about climate, our fragile democracy, disease, global nuclear war, women's autonomy, and then more about climate. The message is, we are doomed, and we're starting to feel it. And increasingly violent hurricanes are pounding our shores, and I find myself picturing a near future where my sweet, small 5-year-old is alone, running from a dark, chaotic, dystopian mess, and just, no, no thank you. I am not content to be marching towards that foregone conclusion. So I started reading this book. It's called Long Path by Ari Wallach. Ari is the son of a Holocaust survivor and is becoming a friend. He's also a futurist, which is someone who uses the tools of psychology, sociology, anthropology, technology, and more to study the future. Wallach writes about a particular challenge that he sees when we try to picture our future. What we are most able to conjure, he says, is the official future, the most obvious outcome of our trajectory between what we already know now and some straight dotted line forward. And he teaches it is very, very hard to imagine something significantly different than that. That's just how our minds work. So when we read articles that tell us that the collapse of civilization is the most likely outcome, and we find ourselves ready to believe it, we are gazing out at the official future. It's a definite possibility, but it's not the only possibility. Wallach invites us to look through something called the Voros cone, named for futurist Joseph Voros. Imagine a cone in which we are looking through its small end. It's wrapped loosely around a few times so that it has different tunnels that we can peer through. Our eyes want to look down the center, but the Voros cone invites us to adjust our gaze, not here, towards our official future, but there, towards another possible horizon, a desired future. In fact, Wallach suggests that we don't use the word future at all, but rather futures. In some ways, it's just a gentle shift of our eyes. But what if we were to follow that shift with our bodies, our hearts, our strategies, our laws, and our choices? What if our future doesn't need to be the most obvious outcome of this moment? Doom, fascism, dystopia, division, and collapse. What if it could be better than now? By a lot. Most importantly, what if we really did believe that our future is unwritten and that we are its writers? Now, in case you are thinking, well, this is a nice new pseudoscience for us to get swept up by, we are not the first generation to wander a present that struggles to imagine a different, even a better future. Our ancestors went down to Egypt as free people, but centuries of forced labor and oppression had their impact. Their spirits were crushed. The only future they could see was dark and oppressive. And then something happens, a disruption. God hears the cries of the Israelites, and so calls on Moses and says, "Go and free these people. Tell them I will bring them to a land that is flowing with milk and honey." And Moses, beyond all reason, starts to see a different way forward. He goes to Pharaoh and demands our freedom. With signs and wonders, we go free. We come to a mountain, enter into a covenant with God, and we set out on our journey to that land that we were promised, that land of milk and honey, a much more desired future. It's not a long trip. It's so close, in fact, that Moses right away needs to send scouts to scope it out. So he chooses 12 spies to go. The spies depart from the group of 600,000 and return some days later bereft. Their faces are drawn, they are crestfallen, and they say, "That's not a land of milk and honey. That's a land of terrifying and cruel giants. Why would we go there?" Two disagreed, but the damage had been done. And God punishes the people for our apparent faithlessness by adding a 40-year journey to our story. Or so we generally read. But what if those 40 years are not punishment at all? What if God has realized that something was missing? When they peered over those walls, of course they couldn't see a joyful dream of milk and honey. All they had was tunnel vision towards their official future. In Egypt, they knew terror and scarcity and suffering. So when they look down the road, they can only see terror and scarcity and suffering. They couldn't see a land dripping with milk and honey, just a land dripping with inevitability. They still feel doomed by their tragic future. What was missing was journey. God and Moses had gazed down a different part of the Voros cone and imagined a different horizon, but 600,000 people had not been read in. They needed time to remember that they were part of a longer story whose end had something to do with being the ancestors of a people as great as the stars of the sky and the sands of the sea, to envision a desired future worth wandering toward and worthy of their descendants. They needed room to breathe and dream, and the shortest route between point A and point B was so stifling, so limiting, that they couldn't imagine that their future might still be surprising. This is one of the very hardest things to do, to look past the short-term things coming at us all the time and imagine something that doesn't exist yet, when all the momentum and gravitational forces in the universe are pulling us towards what we think is already a done deal. But Yom Kippur itself is a powerful Voros cone. Here we sit and we gaze out at endless possible futures. We pray and we sing and we tap our chests with the revolutionary truth that something we do today could completely change how our story unfolds, shifting the horizon that we wander toward. We've so far been thinking about our country's future, our planet's future, our collective future on a grand scale. But what if we just begin with our own individual future? It can also feel stifling and unchangeable. We can also have an official future towards which we are barreling. Maybe we've let a friendship run cold because we got hurt, and it's too scary to bring it up. What if we just make things worse? Maybe we're estranged from a sibling or a parent because of old wounds. They're real, but maybe we regret our distance. Maybe we've become embittered or defensive or withholding from a spouse or a child because we're afraid to get vulnerable. But we ache with the hollowness or sharpness of our interactions. Our official future has us growing further and further apart, a trajectory that we can't stop. But what is our desired future? I grew up very close to a couple of cousins in my life who, because of some old rifts and some very real pain, I haven't seen in decades. They've grown up and they have kids now. That's my family out there. In my official future, we never talk again. And their kids don't know mine. And one day, 100 years from now, a stranger meets a stranger, and they have no idea that they are family. That's the most likely outcome, a straight line from here to there. I don't want that. What about you? Do you have a future story about a relationship in your life that seems like it's already written? Whose most obvious trajectory is sad for you, feels doomed in its own tragic way? If that future weren't already written, what would you write? For transgressions between us and God, we know it. This day atones. But for transgressions between us and another person, we sit here with pen or paintbrush in hand. On this day of all days, we get to write or paint our futures and set them into motion with our choices, our actions. Down this path, the rift is permanent, but down like that one. Maybe our families gather for the holidays once again. Maybe we sit around drinking beer, remembering the good old days. Maybe we are reunited with our roots and don't feel as lonely. Maybe our friendship is flourishing and full of laughter. How we miss the sound of their laughter. The next part is harder still. Yom Kippur is also a communal Voros cone, holding us accountable for and inspiring our collective action. So now what of our world, our country? The dire and dangerous days that we are living now, when we feel exhausted and afraid or numb. How do we imagine a different horizon? One not bound by dark inevitability and fatalistic foregone conclusions. What world do we want for our children's children's children? What horizon can you imagine with safe drinking water and clean air and calm seas and just laws applied equally to all? What global peace, what national collaboration, what bodily autonomy, what gentleness and kindness and respect and trust, what opportunity and enoughness and abundance can you imagine down our Voros cone towards a desired future? The images are fuzzy, aren't they? We don't have the answers yet. If we did, we'd just do that. We often get stuck between imagining a pie-in-the-sky, unicorns and rainbows world and too limiting a vision where we end up with something that looks a lot like this, but with jetpacks. Imagining something radically different, but still possible, that's our sweet spot. But how do we do it? As it turns out, God has to answer that same question. Now that the people have 40 more years to yearn for and dream up that land of milk and honey, how are they going to do that in a wilderness of briars and brush? They, like we, need to exercise their imagination for what is possible. And it comes from everywhere. God teaches us to imagine abundance by providing unending and magical manna from the heavens to feed us. Miriam teaches us joyful freedom and unfettered movement through dance and song and musical instruments. Moses speaks to us in lyrical poetry and metaphor to help us dream beyond words. Rocks slake our thirst, splashing us awake. At night we see fire over the camp, and the flames ignite our minds and shake us from the ordinary. The mountains teach us grandeur, and the sunrises teach us color beyond our wildest dreams. And the rains teach us rhythm, and all of it is art that fills us with the capacity to imagine and dream. And all of our senses become differently alive, and our eyes and our hearts open, and we start to be able to see things that we literally could not see before. And when we arrive at the shore of the Jordan River, gazing into the same land that we saw 40 years earlier, we can see something entirely different. The land of milk and honey that was so unimaginable before is now described like this. Dew is always available. The land is irrigated by springs, open to the sun, open to the moon, abundant and not lacking anything. We have exchanged doom for dream. We have this in us too. Even if we are afraid for our children, for our daughters, for this planet, for our freedom. Even if we are struggling to articulate it now, we have this in us too. Rebecca Solnit, author and historian, recently wrote, "I am not sure why people like to make predictions about events years off, as if the present moment is going to hold steady, rather than that a host of unforeseen changes will happen in the interim. I remember when a black man could not win the 2008 election. I remember that marriage equality would never happen. Saw Ireland become a country that voted for abortion and marriage equality. I went and read the news from 1989 to confirm that people didn't see what was coming with the East Bloc countries. The night before the Paris Climate Treaty was agreed to, smart people told me it was never going to happen. The world we are in now," she writes, "was wildly unimaginable a few decades ago." And I will add that Luke Skywalker does not turn to the dark side. Regardless of everyone telling him it was his destiny, he wrote a different future for himself and for the galaxy. It's true that we can't move forward towards our desired future if we can't picture it. But maybe we can do that together. This year and next year and onward, we can play and tell stories and dream and engage in heart-opening and pulse-racing and vision-disrupting art and music and poetry and taste and new learning, Torah and science, and all the things that open us towards new possible futures. We're going to begin that conversation about climate on October 15th, and you can sign up to be part of that right outside in the vestibule on a QR code after this service, thanks to CBE leaders who want to share in the dream of that new horizon. And not just that. Maybe together we can look through the Voros cone and conjure new horizons where women's bodies are not political fodder, and anti-Semitism and racism are not foregone conclusions, and poverty is not inevitable, and our children are allowed to be exactly who they are, and do not inherit from us a dystopia, but instead a gentler and healthier planet. I won't suggest that it's going to be easy, but I also won't suggest that it's time to throw in the towel. Our tradition does not give us a lot of specifics about a better, desired future, mostly just flashes and images of what could be. But one of those comes from the prophet Isaiah. He pictures a horizon where V'shi'asha yonek al chor patan, a baby will play over a viper's hole. A child will pass his hand over a serpent's den. He paints a picture where those who are right now enemies and predators will one day not be. A whole different narrative. And that baby, with her hand over the viper's hole, she's not a metaphor, she's not a theory, it's a child, a descendant of ours, maybe hundreds of years from now. Way down that path, the actions that we take today will affect whether that child, our child, gets to feel joyful and calm and safe. How much we want her to have all of that. This person we don't even know yet. Wallach calls this feeling transgenerational empathy. I'm trying to picture 100 years from now. 2 little kids are playing in a playground. They're fifth cousins or something. Their parents are sitting on a bench chatting away, laughing, retelling old stories, delighted because of something I might choose to do before the sun goes down tonight. What can you picture through your Voros cone for your life, for your family? What can we picture some hundreds of years from now for our world? Like it was for our ancestors, our future horizon has our signatures on it, and our descendants are counting on us to stop doom scrolling, to dare to believe that our future and their present is not a foregone conclusion, to remember that our actions today will reverberate and shape hundreds, maybe thousands of years to come. Long path thinking is the thing that makes us plant a seed today, open a book today, have our first relational meeting of a justice campaign, write the first line of a poem, buy hiking boots. Because our decision to begin something sets us in a different direction, reminds us that we're part of a longer story. Imagine if our ancestors had never been given a 40-year perspective and had only the shortness of breath that comes with their official future. Had they never shifted their hearts and hike's trajectory, where would we be now? May this Yom Kippur and this new year get inside of us and inspire us to shift our gaze together, dream and imagine together, shape our own alternative futures and design new ones for our community, our country, and our world. May we set our eyes on the horizons that our descendants deserve, and may we be the ancestors that they need us to be. Amen. Gemar Tov.